All right. Hi, everyone. Thank you all for coming. Welcome to the final session of the Women in Naval Engineering track, the current state of research. I am Jane Louie with Gibbs & Cox. I will be moderating today's panel. A couple of housekeeping items before we get started. You should have received a bingo board when you came in today. Whenever any of the panelists say one of the words on your board, cross it off, and when you get bingo, you can give your board to one of the people with a red sticker on their badge. There are going to be 3 prizes for the first 3 people who submit their boards. They'll have a choice of a year of ASNE membership, ASNE Day 2015 registration, or registration for a continuing education online course. For those of you who didn't know, this week is National Engineers Week. Yesterday was Introduce a Girl to Engineering Day, so mark your calendars for next year. We had a bunch of middle and high school kids come in yesterday, and we were able to give them an introduction to engineering, and we seem to get some positive feedback from that. So this has so far been a good experience for them. All right, so our speakers today, we have Ms. Kelly Cooper, who is a program officer with the Office of Naval Research, the Ship Systems and Weapons Department. Ms. Peggy Lane is the assistant provost for faculty development at Virginia Tech. Ms. Brandy Smith from Huntington Ingalls Industries, Newport News Shipbuilding, and Dr. Paige Smith, the director of Women in Engineering program at the University of Maryland. So we're going to have each of our speakers introduce themselves, and then we'll open the floor to questions for open discussion. All right, so we're going to start with Paige. Oh, yes.
Thank you, Jane. So I'd like to thank Lee McHugh for inviting me to participate in the panel. It's a true honor to be here, and Jennifer Lynn for organizing us. As Jane introduced me, I'm Paige Smith, and I direct the Women in Engineering program at the University of Maryland, and I have been in this role since September 2001, and I have over 20 years of experience recruiting and retaining diverse populations within the field of engineering. The mission of my office is to recruit, retain, and advance women to the field of engineering. So the first part of that mission is to educate girls about what engineering has to offer, what the career opportunities are. And we do this through Saturday programs, summer programs. We have a lot of outreach that we do. And in fact, a week from tomorrow, I have about 750 students, parents, and teachers that I'm expecting to be on campus, and we're going to talk about what a difference you can make with a career in engineering. When we do our outreach and recruitment efforts, we pay very close attention to the messages that we share, because the messages can make or break convincing a young woman that they should go into engineering. Very closely tied to that piece of my mission, I'm also the co-lead for the Mid-Atlantic Girls Collaborative. The Mid-Atlantic Girls Collaborative is an offshoot of the National Girls Collaborative Project, and we bring together girl-serving organizations from the Mid-Atlantic region. And these organizations focus on educating girls about STEM. We teach the people within our collaborative how to effectively work with students. We provide professional development training for hands-on STEM learning. We provide training on appropriate messages, and we also provide training on program evaluation. I was really excited by the opening panel yesterday morning about everyone who was talking about the importance of giving back. Your Girl Day program yesterday, these are all very important things. So if anyone here is interested in being a mentor or role model to a young woman and you don't know where to get started, please see me after the session. I can connect you to hundreds of people in our area who would love to have you come and visit their programs. The second piece of my mission is retaining and graduating women so that they can join the workforce as productive engineers. And we host a number of retention programs. We have a living and learning community that supports first and second year women in their engineering studies. We provide mentoring, undergraduate research, experiences, and a host of other things. One of the organizations that I am heavily involved with is the Women in Engineering Proactive Network, otherwise known as WEPAN. Our core purpose is to propel higher education to increase the number and advance the prominence of diverse communities of women. And we go about this by systematically changing culture. That is our focus, culture change. WEPAN offers a wonderful set of resources. One of our core competencies is translating research into practice. So we heard Christy Corbett yesterday talk about the study Why So Few from the AAUW. WEPAN offers a series of resources to help you understand how the research can translate both into academic recruitment and retention of women, but also in industry. If you could advance the slide. Oh, sorry. No, keep that one up.
Sorry, I jumped on.
The slide that shows is a change model for bringing gender equity into organizations. The traditional thinking around how you bring gender equity into organizations has been, if you add women and stir, they will thrive and prosper. And I think we all understand from the research that was shared with us yesterday, that's not exactly true. After 20 years of studying the issues, we understand that getting gender equity into our organizations is much more complex, much more nuanced. So the Center for Gender Equity in Organizations, which is out of the Simmons School of Business, developed 4 frames, and that is what is shown on the frame on the slide. Each of these frames is very important, and each of these frames, it's very easy to understand of it if we think about differences, individual differences. So at the first frame, equipping the women, this is where we recognize that men and women are different, and we want to minimize those differences so that women and men can compete as equals. At the second level is valuing difference. And this is when we recognize that people are different and we celebrate it because difference is good. At the third level, the frame is providing equal opportunity. And this is recognizing that because of our differences, not everyone has a chance to come to the table. And so sometimes you need legalistic, procedural policies to go in place to ensure equity within organizations. The first 3 frames are things that we traditionally know about. They are things that we have been doing for a long time. It is the 4th frame that makes a huge difference, and that is managing your culture to re-envision how you think of difference and to value those differences and to make it the fabric of what you do and how you do it, and to let go of those pieces of culture that are not so good and to better value those pieces of culture that are good. If you could go to the next slide. So I know that was a very ambiguous, quick run through because we only have 8 minutes to talk about it. So I have some examples from academics and industry of how these things are operationalized. So equipping the women are those important things like professional development, providing mentoring, helping people figure out how to navigate a process. And those are very important. The valuing differences are things like affinity groups, celebrations of diversity. Some organizations will have a diversity day. At the University of Maryland, we have something called the Inclusive Language Campaign that teaches our students that the words that come out of your mouth may unintentionally marginalize a group when you had no concept that was what you were doing. So language is important. In terms of providing equal opportunity, those are things like Title IX, EEO policies, transparency in hiring and promotion. Those are examples of things that organizations do. And then finally, with managing your culture, it's important for organizations to be aware of their culture and to understand their culture, and that is done through evaluation. Studying the data that exists. How are women retained compared to the men? How do women think about your organization compared to the men? And then taking that data and doing something with it. An example that might make it a little bit easier, we heard yesterday about the experience from Allison Stiller where she had the gentleman who was taken to task because he did not think about the impact of his design on the people that had to use it. Well, if you think about it, that he was approaching his design from a very masculine perspective. If the values of something like cooperation, empathy, were valued more strongly, then maybe he would have thought of the end user a little bit more. And that's where really managing your culture and understanding the values that organizations innately have can make a big difference. And with that, I will end it and turn it over to the next person, Peggy.
Thanks, Paige. I kind of twisted Paige's arm to speak first because I thought that the 4 frameworks that she introduced would be a great structure for the rest of our remarks. So I'm Peggy Lane. I started out my career in 1980 as an environmental engineer and spent several years working at various consulting firms in the water and wastewater treatment and hazardous waste management fields. I spent almost 10 years doing hazardous waste site investigations at Navy bases across the southeastern US, and until this week that was the closest I've come to naval engineering. During that time, I was active as a volunteer leader in the Society of Women Engineers, ultimately serving as national president. And I was then able to parlay my interests and commitment to advancing women in the field of engineering to the position which I currently hold at Virginia Tech. So I was hired by Virginia Tech in 2003 to run a National Science Foundation funded program called Advance, that was focused on transforming higher education institutions to allow women faculty in the sciences and engineering to be more successful. So that's an example of a focus on changing institutional culture in addition to equipping the women and leveling the playing field and appreciating diversity. Some of the things that we do at Virginia Tech include educational programs for all faculty about unconscious bias, some of the things that Christy Corbett told us about yesterday, as well as implementing and tracking the impact of work-life balance policies to make it easier for both men and women faculty to combine career advancement with their personal lives. I was asked to talk a little bit about research on women in engineering, and I wanted to highlight a particular study that is fairly recent and one of a relatively small number of studies that focuses on women engineers in the workplace. If you start to do some investigation about what we know about women in engineering, there have been a lot of studies focusing on college students, and thanks to the kind of work that Paige does and the organization that she mentioned, WEPAN, we know quite a bit about college students and how they get interested in engineering, how they can succeed in engineering, some of the challenges that they face in engineering school. College students are a relatively easy population to study. You know, they're enrolled in an educational institution, they come to class, we collect lots of data on them, we know where to find them if we want to ask them questions. It's much more difficult to go into the workplace and collect information about the experiences of people, men or women, working in a professional setting. But recently, in the last couple of years, there have been a couple of very ambitious and thought-provoking studies that have come out. This one in particular by Fuad and Singh was a survey of over 5,000 women who have received bachelor's degrees in engineering over the past 30 years. So they have a very robust data set from which to draw some conclusions. And they looked at women who received degrees in engineering but never worked as engineers, women who started out in engineering positions but left after less than 5 years, and women who persisted in engineering. And so they've provided us with some information about why women leave engineering. And one of their findings was that it's not necessarily to raise families. In some cases it is, but many women leave because they're not happy with the work that they're doing, the way they're treated in the workplace, the organizational climate, or their supervisors. So some of the things that we know from this study about why women stay in engineering, and that's the next slide, seem like, when you look at them, common sense. women stay in engineering because they're valued, they're able to make significant contributions through their work, they're treated as colleagues, and have a supportive work environment. So the researchers have some specific conclusions and recommendations for employers, for supervisors, for mentors, for colleagues, for things that we can do to help women to be successful and to stay in engineering. And I would say many of these things apply to men as well. And that's to provide them with the opportunity to develop their expertise, to give meaningful contributions, to be rewarded for their work, and to be valued colleagues in the workplace. So women who are treated as less competent, less valued, are undermined by their supervisors and their coworkers are not likely to hang around in those kinds of organizations. If you're looking for more research on women in engineering, in addition to there's a website that WEPAN has organized called the it's now Women in STEM Knowledge Center. So the WSKC is an online resource. The Society of Women Engineers publishes an annual review of the scholarly literature on women in engineering for the past 10 or 12 years now, and those findings are compiled and available on the Society of Women Engineers website. And I actually published an anthology about women in engineering that was published by the American Society of Civil Engineers Press a few years ago that compiles some of the early research about women in engineering. When I started that project, there was actually a very limited amount of information. It was fairly easy to collect the body of knowledge on women in engineering, and I'm delighted that since those volumes were published, there's been quite an explosion of research, partly as a result of programs funded by the National Science Foundation. So we are continuing to learn about ways that we can get young people interested in engineering careers and keep people in engineering careers once they start out. And I'll wrap it up there and pass it on to our next speaker.
My name is Brandy Smith. I'm an engineering manager at Newport News Shipbuilding. Been in the shipyard since about 2002 when I graduated from NC State with my engineering degree. It was quite obvious up front that I was going to go into engineering. I had a love for math, and my English scores were nowhere near what my math scores were on my SATs. So it was accounting or engineering, and someone told me I might get bored with accounting, so I went with engineering, and I'm glad I did. Yesterday we heard the panelists talk a lot about getting out of your comfort zone and taking opportunities and looking for things you may not be interested in, and I think my career so far has kind of been one of those examples. I've been at the shipyard the entire time, but I've had multiple assignments. I started off as a system engineer, working with piping systems in our overhaul division, which meant I got to spend quite a few weeks on the West Coast ship checking right away, which I'm an only child and didn't go far from home, so spending 3 weeks on the West Coast by yourself was quite an adventure to start off with. Wasn't real comfortable with that, but I was willing to take on the experience. Also worked some other systems when I got to new construction. An opportunity came up after about 5 years being a system engineer with a group within our department that allowed me to learn about our 3D and 2D tools that we used. As a system engineer, I wasn't familiar with this, and it also gave me the opportunity to take on a supervisor role with those groups, as well as the pipe shop liaison, which actually takes the products that we design in the model and goes to build those. So I wasn't familiar with that either, but I was willing to take on a new challenge and took on my first supervisor role with the pipe shop liaison and a 3D product model group. Over the years, I've had about 3 different opportunities to be supervisors in different areas. About every year now, I'm seeing a new cycle. So I've been 2 years in this engineering manager position with piping and ventilation. We're doing real well, but again, outside my comfort zone, I've been piping up to this point and took on a ventilation group about 2 years ago. So definitely illustrative of what they talked about yesterday about getting outside of your comfort zone and willing to take on new opportunities. So for today, I was going to cover some things that we do specific at Newport News Shipbuilding to recruit and retain our employees. One of the first things we do is recruiting at local universities, and we take our actual recent graduates back to the university. So instead of just having someone there from HR who can kind of generally give you the specifics about a job, we have the people that are doing the work that can talk to others to get them excited about this is the kind of work you're really going to be doing when you come as an engineer and work at Newport News Shipbuilding. I've participated in some of those, and I found it valuable, and I find myself talking a lot to the people that come up to learn about your company, and they're probably going, I'm not really sure what she's talking about, but it sounds really cool right now. But it gets you excited about the job you do, and it gets those excited about potential people coming to work at the shipyard. Summer internships, we'd like to try to create a pipeline of potential engineers, so we get summer internships, get those folks in there, and hopefully give them a good, valuable work. Get them out to the shop, get them out to the ship, give them the real experience of being at the shipyard, not just here's some specs and requirements, go read them, and sit there for a couple of months. So we try to get them involved in our day-to-day activities and hope to create that pipeline so when they graduate, they're coming back to work with us at Newport News. Career pathways, partnering with local schools. We've been focusing on the high school level and kind of in line with what we were talking about yesterday and Dr. Smith here. We were focused on high schools, and we're really trying to get involved more at the middle school level now and trying to focus those STEM activities at the middle school level that can then translate to high school and eventually into college careers, and try to get them interested in some of the science and technology activities earlier on in their development so they're aware of it and what they should be out there looking for. Tuition reimbursement is kind of a bonus that we offer, and you don't realize the value of it until you use it yourself, but that's one of the things that not every company offers coming right out of school, and it's a good opportunity to go to work, get some experience, get hands-on experience, and pursue continuing education. And finally, we've got a new engineering program through our apprentice school that's also going to attract new folks. Some people are worried about trying to go to school and pay for that and work at the same time. This is a new program that's going to allow them to come out of the apprentice school with an engineering degree and come to work, with already experience through the apprenticeship and also an engineering degree. So these are some of the initiatives that we do to recruit, good engineers at the shipyard. So once we've recruited those folks, we want to retain them. We put a lot of effort into the initiatives and recruitment. So one of the things we like to do is assign mentors. It can be formal or informal. But mentoring is a key piece of trying to work with folks and make sure that, you said some people may leave because they don't like their work environment. We want to get those things up front, and it may just be a particular situation, something we can address and try to fix up front. So we've got that mentorship set up both formally and informally. Ship's Network is what it is now. It used to be the New Hire Community of Practice when we started it about 10 years ago, and it was focused around those new people that come into a company. Newport News may not be their hometown. There's 20,000 employees. There's probably plenty of people with their same interests all over the shipyard, but they don't know it. So this gives them a network of people to that have their same interests, maybe right out of school. They do social activities. They do, lunch and learns. They do after hours presentations, and it gives them that community to kind of have a support system right out of the gate when they come to work at Newport News. Award nominations and conferences, we try to get the information out there to our folks, make sure they're aware of what opportunities there are so that we can also put them in position to develop them to be in a position to win one of those awards eventually at some of the conferences. We have a lot of rotation programs that benefits the employee and the company as well. We try to get them out there to see what other activities there are at Newport News. It helps them learn about shipyard operations. When they come back to engineering, they maybe have some real hands-on experience, get them down to shops, things like that. Have a lot of engagement activities. We have what we call engagement champions. They actually kind of serve as hearing the voice of the floor. When you're a new employee, you don't understand why we do some of those things, but you probably don't have a voice to really speak up and say, I'm not really sure I understand why. We have engagement champions that kind of hear that voice of the floor and help people communicate so we can, hear what the new employees are saying and try to adjust, things that we need to in the management level to address those concerns. We've got some employee resource groups. WISE is our Women in Shipbuilding. that's focused around mostly women, but it's also inclusive to anybody else that wants to join. But it helps give a support system and different information out to those females that want to have mentors, and they want female mentors. They can go through the WISE program. They do a lot of outreach activities, community service, and we're trying actually to start a SWE affinity group also to start working with our local chapter, Society of Women Engineers. I've got a lot of people that work at Newport News that are part of that program, but we don't all know each other at Newport News. So finally, some of the things that are kind of some tools for the supervisors and managers as well as the mentors. We have EPL training that kind of, here's your new supervisor or manager role. Here's the kind of things that we expect you to know different than the old responsibilities you have. You get into a management role, it's different than your individual contributor role, and sometimes you're not sure how to make that adjustment. So the EPL training helps those folks move from an individual contributor to a management type role. We have monthly leadership workshops. And we want to talk about leadership, not just the day-to-day managing activities. So once a month, we've committed to getting all of our managers together and talking about what things we should be doing as leaders to help promote our individual contributors. How do we develop those folks? We spend a lot of time working for career and personal development with our employees. We're trying to understand what their interests are and try to provide them with that mentorship and the development they need to be good leaders. Strengths Finder assessment is one of the things tools that we use to identify what your strengths are. And a lot of times we think about what our strengths are and what our weaknesses are, and then we always try to concentrate on what our weaknesses are. And this kind of takes a different approach of what are your strengths and how do we just capitalize on those strengths and then surround us with people that have different strengths than us that can help make that beneficial. One of the individuals I'm mentoring, she thought she knew what her strengths were, but she was interested in taking it, and I got her set up with our department to take the Strengths Finder, and she said, wow, it was nothing new, but it just really gave me that extra confidence of knowing what I was really good at. And now when I go into things, I have that different mentality of, okay, I know I'm good at these things, and now I need to move on to somebody else who can help me with benefit and complement the things that I'm not so strong at. And then, of course, recognition programs. We have different recognition programs to try to keep people motivated for the good things they do, to recognize them with their peers, and then continue to foster the environment. So that said, I'm already over my time. I'll turn it over to Ms. Cooper.
Thank you, Brandy. Let me get set up here. I want to first of all thank Jennifer Lynn for all of the organizational work that she's done, and Glenn Sturdivant for thinking of my name to be included in this panel. I look around the room and I see all of the other women that could be sitting up here instead and present probably a lot of things that I don't have in my background but would round out and complement this group. So I'm very much appreciative of the privilege to get up and address you today. I wanted to, my background is that I originally started as an ocean engineer working at the David Taylor Model Basin. I was hired to work on the Mobile Offshore Base program, so I got quite an education on naval logistics, and I knew more about crane systems than I ever thought I would as an ocean engineer. I was classified as a naval architect. I am not one, but I have worked towards a systems engineering master's degree at Johns Hopkins, and I think that broadly naval architects are systems engineers. I now work for the Office of Naval Research, and I manage a portfolio, a basic research portfolio that includes something called the National Naval Responsibility for Naval Engineering. And some of the goals for that program are to develop people and to increase the knowledge base. I read an article about 10 years ago, and I have heard Mrs. Lacey quote this because we've talked about it, is that people are our only appreciating asset. Our buildings are deteriorating, our facilities require a lot of upkeep, and all of the knowledge that we create through model tests or other experimentation goes deep into some cave or some computer, and it only has relevance with the contextual basis that people associated with the development and use of that information bring to the table. So people are really, really important. It's very important to recruit the right people, and you don't want to select the only 10 that apply. One of the tenets for the NNRNE is to fund 10 new postdocs annually in 7 key technology areas that support ship and submarine design and acquisition. You don't want to fund the only 10 postdocs that apply, so that implies having a very long pipeline. You want hundreds of postdocs to be vying for these research dollars. You want then thousands of master's level students going into these key technology areas as PhD students. You want to then look at high school students who are entering the undergraduate programs and do more to attract those students. And you need to go back all the way to middle school so that these students are taking the right math, the right science, so that they are then qualified to enter these programs at the freshman level at college. So I do have, as part of the NNRNE portfolio, a strong STEM outreach component, and I see a couple of the people involved in that in the back of the room. Our premier program is the Sea Perch Underwater Robotics Program. That is focused on creating awareness and then advocating interest and eventually encouraging pursuit. So there's a yellow brick road effect where we catch students at a young age and we have some directional arrows that say, follow this pathway if you liked what you did. There are many off-ramps to that. Some of them end up as naval engineers working for the Navy or for DoD contractors. Many of them end up as scientists or mathematicians in other areas, and we're happy to contribute to the national research capacity and the national STEM capacity in that way. They're not all going to join the Navy. I wanted to say that then once we attract these students to come to work for us, a leading indicator of retention and their future success is the strength of their relationship with that first mentor. And many times this is done very serendipitously and ad hoc. I think that there are advantages to that, there are disadvantages to that. I can say quite honestly, although I tried to participate in a regulated formal program at Carderock at one point where we were taking the Myers-Briggs exam and being partnered with somebody who we were be compatible with, that never worked out. The program was not actually executed once I had taken the test, and I was going to pay it forward and be a mentor as well as be mentored. But I have had the great good fortune to be mentored by some really incredible people, and I think that the strength of the relationship was because we were so diverse. Many of them were older gentlemen. I have not had the honor or the privilege of being mentored by a senior woman in the Navy, but again, I think I've gotten some diversity by the exposure to thoughts different than my own and experiences different than those I would be likely to have. I would like to encourage many of the women here to think about mentoring a young man. Now, there's a reason for that. If we expect them to behave differently, if we expect them to be more accepting of a woman's point of view, then we need to educate them on what that point of view might be and the differences in the two, and allow them to then choose their own path, but they can only do that if they've had that first exposure. And so I encourage women to be mentored by men and women to mentor young men as well. In the old days, it was likely that you would have a 30-year career or more as an engineer, and that your father or your mother, in some cases, probably rare as it is for people of our age, to have a mother that was an engineer. Many of them would stay with the same company for 30 years. My own father was an engineer for Honeywell and worked in the aerospace community, and I can remember going with him to watch space launches and for the Mercury and Apollo programs. It was very exciting, and I think that heavily influenced me. However, my dad stayed with that company until the end. It's likely in the new age, and I heard about this on NPR last night, so it reinforced some things I had read in the past, that a new person entering the workforce, even if it wasn't technology, would be likely to change jobs 6 to 15 times over a 30-year career. And this implies only a 2 to 5 year stint at any one job. And when I was doing recruiting for Carderock, would go out and on my stump speech say that those statistics were true, but you could join the Navy or join the DoD workforce and be with us for 30 or 40 years and really change jobs every 2 to 3 to 4 years. So it never got stale. You know, you've been where you are and you have seen that the ability to do that with a large company. I think the Navy offers that as well. I would just like to also say that everybody needs an individual development plan. They need to think about the future, and part of that individual development plan needs to include where you want to be in 5, 10, 15 years, and what are the resources that you think you need to get there, and then take ownership of that career path for yourself. And thank you for your time.
At this time, we would like to invite any audience members to ask questions to our panel. Can you use the microphone?
This is one of my mentors, so. Yeah.
My name is Al Skolnick. I'm a past president of this society and became active in the leadership of the society, in the early 70s, after I finished about 20 years of other activities as a professional killer and career naval officer. Yesterday's attendances by me at this track was just illuminating, great. And of course I went home and thought about it. And so I have a set of words here I'd like to pose to each of the members of this panel, not sequentially, but whatever you choose to leap in for. And this is for discussion purposes. I'd like to pose 2 events for your consideration. The issue is this. Would it take a we're engineers. Would it take a probability of at least 0.5 in each of the events I will remark on before we see quantum improvement in attracting more women into engineering careers? Here's event A. You, your family, and your friends' gifts to your young sons include dolls or toy ovens. Event B. You, your family, and your friends' gifts to your young daughters include model airplane kits or toy guns. That's the question. Would it take 50-50 prospect of those events occurring before you really see a major shift or change in women going into engineering careers and staying?
So Al, I'm not sure how to answer that question, but I will tell you that it's been my experience as a mother of only daughters and having no brothers, but being a babysitter of young boys, that young men will take anything and turn it into a weapon. You can give a group of girls and boys a set of Lego toys, and the girls will build a house and play dollhouse, and the boys will build guns or something else with it. My daughters, when they were 5 and 6, they were both born in December, so we had a joint birthday party, and it was the first birthday party at which they had invited boys. And they had a piñata that was the Lion King. And after they had exploded the piñata, the head was still intact, and we left it hanging from the tree outside. And the girls ran off and were playing, and the boys got the bat and began attacking and cheering for one another to hit the heck out of this piñata head. You know, I think they're fundamentally different at that age, and nothing we do really impacts it. I will say that in my own life, when I was 10 years old, my mother took me to the Science Center every Wednesday, where I was free to play with and build a hovercraft or prick my finger and look and do my own blood typing under the microscope, dissect a chicken heart, and that was what did, I think, more for me personally than any toy I could have been given to play with.
There are cultural implications, as Dr. Smith remarked.
Yeah.
I'll chime in. I don't have any children, but I will tell you from my perspective that I kind of agree. I don't know something at that age would have a major impact. You know, I know growing up, I just tended to, you know, why, till they just said, shut up and go to your room. But I asked those questions a lot, and I spent, you know, time with my dad. He worked with his hands all the time. He did construction. He did worked on cars, and I just was around that, and it was a lot of influence on me and a lot of influence from, you know, teachers and things as I was coming up and trying to help guide me down that path. So I don't know as much at that young age if that would make a big difference or not. It wasn't necessarily, I mean, I played with dolls as a child, and then I got to where I liked, you know, different sports, and competition is my #1 strength. That may have driven me to I can do everything the boys can do kind of attitude, but that was more of an influence of people around me and the things they were trying to help guide me with as I was coming along that kind of influenced that.
There's some study that also suggests that women in high corporate positions have a strong correlation to an experience of sporting activities, or you know, so they may have played soccer or softball or something in college, but there's some strong correlation in that.
But the issue is, would you, if you have, as you have children and their sons, would you be willing to give them gifts that included dolls, toy ovens, etc.? And similarly, if you have sons, if you have daughters, would you be prepared to give them the kind of things that we give to young boys? And my point is only that you are also participating in the ingraining of these youngsters, these sprouts, these curtain climbers, as they come up.
Yeah. My toy of preference is the sea perch. Generic.
So we're talking about cultural expectations and gender schemas. How many of you watched the Super Bowl? How many of you saw the Goldilocks ad after halftime? Okay, so Goldilocks is a toy, an engineering toy for young girls that's gotten a lot of press in social media and won a lot of awards over the last year. It's a company that was started through a Kickstarter campaign by a young woman, engineering graduate of Stanford. And it's a construction toy that is designed around stories that are designed to be of interest to young girls. There's also been a recent attention to Legos and the overall gendering of toys in this country. And you may have come across a photograph of a Lego ad from the early 1970s that shows a young girl in overalls and pigtails playing with red and blue Legos, contrasting with the Lego ads that you'll see today, where there's a line of pink Legos that's particularly targeted towards girls, and it's making the point that 30 or 40 years ago we had somewhat more gender-neutral toys available, whereas today if you go into a Toys R Us store or go out to look for toys for children, you will see toys for girls and toys for boys, and raising the issue of how problematic that can be.
So I was going to contribute the Goldilocks as well, so I'm glad you brought that in, Peggy. But your question is dead on. It's socialization, and I think in our society today we can't answer that because our brains don't make that leap quite yet. Now, I do know that I grew up with a brother, and I would borrow his cap guns, and maybe that's why I went into engineering, I don't know. But your point is a very interesting one.
The finger's pointing back at each of us.
Absolutely. It is.
can go ahead and line up to ask your questions.
Tali Kruger, thank you very much for participating. It has been very interesting. And I will support the gentleman's point of view. What I think is that we need to, whenever we're talking about long-lasting changes, we need to start working on at different levels, as I mentioned yesterday, and one is the society and the bias that we have towards girls and boys and toys. That was one of my main problems. I have 3 daughters, and they were very interested always in cars. And I will get them cars, and we will make races at home. Whenever they started going to kindergarten, they were interested in playing with the boys' toys. And one of the teachers, kindergarten teacher, came and said, no, 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 no. This is for the boys. You don't play with that because you are a girl. She came back to me and said, no. And I went and talked to the teacher and said, no, that's not the way I have raised my children. And I don't want them to have these biases. So I'm completely supportive about, now I have the experience of different cultures. And whenever we do have that bias, I was really surprised, for example, going to Europe from my home country, that it was the same type sort of bias, not as strong in the States, though. And whenever you are, for example, in Texas, that bias is much more stronger. So my question to you, Dr. Smith, is you mentioned that you are working locally at the local level, mentoring and so on. What is done at a national level? How do we transfer that? I'm personally involved in mentoring and shadowing events for girls at my company, and we host these shadowing events. But whenever I'm looking at the overall picture, I feel that my effort is just one drop in an ocean.
So thank you for raising that question. When I mentioned the Mid-Atlantic Girls Collaborative, we're part of a national organization called the National Girls Collaborative, because what was discovered is that you have a lot of piecemeal efforts going on around the country, and no one knows about each other. Or you've had a child finish your program. What do you do with that child when they get to the next age level and they're no longer eligible for your program? So that's one of the reasons why the National Girls Collaborative was started, to connect all of the people who do those efforts and to do it in a very systematic, thoughtful way with professional development so that best practices are shared. Because you're right, if we are, I mean, the little corner efforts, the grassroots efforts are absolutely critical, but it's by thinking more systemically and how we can work together to promote each other and to encourage students past what we have to offer. That's what's really important. And through that national effort, we try to connect people who are like you, professionals in the workforce, who can be outstanding role models, with people who are running the programs themselves, who may not have that technical experience to share. So it is important to have that national connection.
And there are numerous national organizations that do that type of outreach work, including the Society of Women Engineers and most of the engineering professional technical societies. The National Academy of Engineering had a project several years ago to try to collect information about what all the different engineering organizations were doing with regards to pre-college outreach, and to facilitate a framework so that people weren't reinventing the wheel all the time. There are also some resources available through a project funded by the National Science Foundation, the Assessing Women and Men in Engineering project, which provides some resources to help people organize and evaluate the impact of those kinds of outreach activities. Because one of the things that the National Academies found was that lots of people like to go out and talk to kids about engineering, but very few organizations collect data on the outcomes of those kinds of activities, and how can we learn how to make those activities more impactful. And so this project put together a set of resources to help people evaluate the impact of their outreach projects.
Good morning. Just as a side note, this is a very funny discussion. I've got a daughter and a son, and both of their parents, myself and my husband, are engineers. Both kids, we provided our son dolls. We wanted him to help with his little sister and have that experience, and we provided all kinds of toys for my daughter. is just truly amazing how quickly they focus to their gender toys. and that's been true. But the other thing, my daughter went to an art school, but when she was in high school, trying to understand what portfolios were, we really didn't have a good understanding of what an art portfolio was. And between her sophomore and junior year in high school, we sent her to the Corcoran for a 2-week, 8-hour-a-day intensive portfolio development class. It was just crucial for her going to that art school, got her a scholarship, all that. And then yesterday, 2 of the panel members talked about a high school level, university-run engineering program in the summers. So what I'm wondering, is there more of that? Is that an effective way to get girls to really see and understand sort of the short course, like the 2-week summer course engineering thing? Is the University of Maryland doing it? So
Absolutely, we do a lot of that. At the University of Maryland, through the Women in Engineering program, we focus on the pipeline. So we actually start with rising 3rd and 4th graders in elementary school, and we provide summer programs at each level, almost each level. We don't do anything for 6th grade right now, until they actually enter into college. And it is to give them a stepping stone so that every year or two there is something that can speak to their engineering interest. And you do see universities across the country doing that. I know of a lot of universities just in this area that offer summer and Saturday programs. Some universities will also partner with local elementary schools, high schools, middle schools for those engineering type after school activities. First Robotics, Future City are a couple of those. But those efforts are very widespread around the country.
There are a lot of programs. There's one called the National Leadership
Conference.
Conference, yeah. And they, back in, I believe, 2003, started one in engineering, and they housed the students for 3 weeks at University of Maryland. And I was pleased to be associated with them through Denny Cruzy from ASNE, who contacted me and said, can you have them, there's 15 kids, and can they come over to Carderock one day? And it turned out there were 10 groups of 15 kids, so it was 150. And it wasn't just one cadre, they had 2 or 3 cadres that summer. And we gave them a tour of David Taylor, and it was a pretty successful day. And they came back to us and said that was so good, and students, out of everything they did that summer, really evaluated that highly. Could we do it again the next year? And by the way, it's going to be 4 groups. And I said, well, can we insert a Navy project? And we actually gave them the Sea Perch robotics program, and they did that during their 3 weeks, and on their final day came over and played with it at Carderock. And then they called later in the summer and said they had such a waiting list that they were going to open it up to an additional 150 students only if they could get that 5th date at Carderock that summer. And then since then, I've lost the bubble on it, but they've also opened a set of sessions at Berkeley. So, they're East Coast, West Coast. These are all students who are rising juniors and seniors in high school who really have the math and science gene and have already decided they want to go into engineering, and this is their way to explore types of engineering that they might want to go into. There are other programs that you may be aware of through the Navy called Expand Your Horizon, and those are meant to focus at middle school girls. And I know that the Naval Academy has hosted several activities there. And then at NSF, they have an ongoing, and I don't know the status of it, but it's called Gender Equity Programs. And usually they hook up with national infrastructure programs, so 4-H, Girls and Boys Clubs of America, Girl Scouts, Boy Scouts. And they'll create a summer program where the student has to apply. It's usually girls from 14 to 18. They go and they live somewhere, so it's a dormitory immersion experience for a week or 2. The one I was familiar with was they were studying ecology, and they went and lived up in New York City and went every day to the Bronx Zoo and discovered the interaction between the animals and the planet. They had to write a prospectus, go back and complete a project, and when they did, they could turn that in with some adult signature and would get a $500 scholarship. So, those kinds of programs exist. It's just tying them all together and helping those directional arrows. If you liked what you did, this is the next step to the students.
Yesterday morning, there were, of the 9 panelists, I think it was 5, who commented on the importance of something at the elementary level and encouraging them to go into STEM. Several of you have mentioned it. Al's question was really focused on that. So I've got a two-part question for you. The first is, in the development from elementary school to middle school into the profession, is there some portion of that development that we understand is most important or highly important to encourage women to go into these fields? And then the second part is, in these kinds of presentations, I hardly ever hear of any programs that are focused at the elementary level. Why is that?
So we have elementary programs because it is important. I think developmentally, there's a lot of data that supports the transition in 7th grade is critical. And that is when most girls lose interest in math, particularly. And so that would be the most critical time set. I know when we were developing our programs, when I first got to Maryland, we had something for high school students. We didn't have anything for middle school or elementary school. So I focused first on middle school because that is a very critical transition point for the students. And then once we got that figured out, then we went down lower because it's a lot easier once they're interested to keep them interested than to try to encourage their interest when they might not be interested yet. So, but that's why you probably see a lot of people starting in middle school and not necessarily in elementary school because of the 7th grade.
And part of the reason for that is that middle school is typically when students start having the option to select what classes they take, and particularly what math classes they take, and whether or not they're going to continue taking college preparatory math classes. So that's a critical transition point in order for young people to keep their career options open and their educational options open to continue in a math-intensive track in middle school and high school, so that when they get to college, they'll have the option of going into a science or engineering career. Most of the elementary school programs are more generally focused on STEM, broadly speaking, science, engineering, math, rather than particularly engineering focused. Although several years ago, Massachusetts developed a set of educational standards for engineering, requiring engineering concepts to be addressed all through the pre-college pipeline, and they were a pioneer in developing those pre-college standards for engineering to be incorporated into the elementary school, middle school, and high school curriculum. And all of those activities are important. And one of the characteristics of activities designed to interest young women that's has had some indication of being effective and important is to tie the science and engineering activities to a social outcome. So to show how the work done by scientists and engineers is able to solve a real-world problem. This is particularly a focus of many computer science outreach activities, that girls are interested in computers and technology as an instrumentation to achieve a goal, rather than being interested in the computer programming itself or the technology itself, but how that skill or activity can be used to accomplish some broader social goal. And I think that's true of young men as well, but it's more likely to be an important characteristic for young women.
I'll say from the industry perspective, I think we've recognized more the focus towards middle school, and that's where we're trying to make new improvements with our career pathways, where we're going into the middle schools and working with them on projects. And we have a school in our area that does have a girls-only kind of STEM team, and we're going to try to take that and share that with other females at other middle schools and see if we can try to help influence that in other areas. But we're also looking to start working in middle schools more so than just the high schools, so we can try to help better influence that decision.
I also have no hard evidence to this, but have the experience of a daughter who was a math major who is now a middle school math teacher. And it's my understanding that many high school and middle school teachers start out with a first degree, an undergraduate degree in the subject that they are going to teach, and go on to then receive a master's degree in curriculum development or delivery, where many of the elementary school teachers only have the undergraduate degree of elementary education, and therefore are not specifically specialists in math and science, and are not necessarily the best equipped to teach those particular subjects and then engender some particular interest, whether it's a girl or a boy, into math and science at the elementary level. So I think that the Navy programs specifically have been focused on hands-on activities, which requires some level of dexterity and some level of teacher involvement, and many teachers are a little hesitant at that K through 5 to be so involved with technology education and then the hands-on dexterity that is required, where you can do that more effectively with the middle school kids. So that's my guess.
Thank you all for your questions, and thank you to our panelists for a great discussion today.